Today I'm going to be doing the first lume battle that I've ever put together. And if you are into lume on watches, stick around because I think this is going to be a treat for you. I don't think there's been another lume battle quite like this before. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back to Just the Watch, the budget watch collecting channel. Today we're going to be looking at 6 of the brightest watches that I have ever tested. If you're like me, you've probably seen some other lume battles on other channels before. I love watching them. It's one of the most fun things to kind of see this kind of side-by-side comparison and have a little bit of competition. We're going to do that here on this channel today, but we're going to do a little bit different. I've spent a lot of time preparing for this particular video, not only in choosing the watches, but actually developing a lume scoring system that I think is somewhat objective that will allow us to not only see kind of subjectively which watch I think is the brightest, but to actually get a numerical value that allow us to compare different watches and see exactly how they stack up against each other. And I'll explain how that process works in a minute, but first let me introduce you guys to the watches that we're going to be checking out today. Okay, first up we have the Seiko Samurai, and this is the watch against which I compare all other watches that come in. Seiko is renowned for having excellent lume, and they certainly do. But it's not the brightest watch I've ever tested, and I'm pretty sure it's going to score last place on this test. The watch that consistently scores the highest on my test has been the Axios Ironclad, which will also feature in today. So that's going to be at the end of the bracket. That's going to be the one to beat, and we'll see if I have rounded up any watches that can top it. I also have the new Orient diver, the RA-0ACK, I think that's the model number, which also scores incredibly well on all the tests that I've done. And then I also have 3 new watches that I have had very limited experience with. However, the limited experience I have been, they've been very bright. One is the Zelos Horizons 43mm. We also have the new Boldr Odyssey 45mm. And just for this test, I asked SWC, the Swiss watch company, to send in one of their Mark II divers because I heard that that had some pretty insane lume. So I've got that one in as well to kind of challenge the slate. Now these 6 watches are incredibly bright. There's not really going to be any losers here today. If they're even in this competition, they're already among the top end of lume when it comes to watches. All right, before we jump into the competition, let's get into some of the nerdy background of how this works. Here's the Seiko Samurai. Now what you're seeing at the top of the screen is a time lapse of the Seiko Samurai, and on the bottom of the screen you're seeing a graph that is actually showing you exactly how bright the watch is at a given point in time. Now we're going over an hour-and-a-half time lapse here, but really I want to focus in on the 60-minute mark as sort of the official score that we're going to be going for. Let me explain a little bit about what these numbers mean. What I've done is I've done a time lapse of each one of these watches under a controlled environment, or at least as controlled as I can get it. And then for every time lapse and every watch, I've gone through at 10-minute intervals, opened up the image in Photoshop and measured the RGB values of some of the pixels on the lumed areas of the watch. I've run those through a couple of formulas and averaged them out to create the score. And I've based this score around the Seiko Samurai. So I've kind of weighted this so that a 10 on this score system is equal to the average brightness of a Seiko Samurai dive watch 1 hour after it has been fully charged. So when you see any of these numbers from here on out, that's what they mean. If you see a score of 15, that means that the watch is 50% brighter than the Seiko Samurai. Likewise, if you see a score of 5, that means it's half as bright. Finally, with all that background out of the way, let's get into the lume challenge. Now, you probably noticed the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. That's because a number of these watches were given to me by brands for review purposes. Some were purchased by myself and some were loaned in for review. So for round 1, we've got 2 sister companies. We're going to take Seiko versus Orient. Let's see how they do. When it comes to lume, few companies have a better reputation than Seiko. With their patented LumeBright formula, they are known for having excellent lume across the board, and the Seiko Samurai is no exception. In fact, this is pretty much the standard that I measure every watch that I test against. And as mentioned, it is the standard for this entire lume system that I came up with. Challenging it is the Orient RA-AC0K, and this watch absolutely blew me away when I opened it up and saw how bright the lume was. So I think this is going to be a fun one. Let's run the challenge and see how they do. So right off the bat, you can see the Orient is coming out ahead, and it keeps that lead throughout the challenge. They do narrow closer as the time goes on, but the Orient is ahead the whole time with a final score of 14, so 40% brighter after an hour than the Seiko Samurai. So in our first round, the Orient handily takes the lead, and that is now going to be the watch to beat. And now we're going to move on to our second round. This time we're going to check out the SWC Diver Mark II versus the new Boldr Odyssey 45mm. The SWC Diver is using Superluminova C3X1 grade lume, which is the brightest lume that Superluminova produces. Not only is it an excellent lume paint, they have applied a lot of it on here. On the dial, they've used 20 layers of C3X1 grade lume, which is absolutely insane, and that results in an incredibly bright dial. Challenging it today is going to be the Boldr Odyssey 45mm. This is a brand new watch from Boldr. It's a watch that's sitting at the top of their range, and the lume that they put in it kind of backs that up. It has been piled on with BGW9 Superluminova, which gives it a nice cool blue glow in the dark and a crisp white look in the daylight. All right, let's check them out and see which one comes out on top. You can see this is an incredibly close matchup. The SWC took a slight lead early on, but it goes back and forth throughout the rest of the thing, and in fact, they wind up with a dead tie at 60 minutes, both of them coming in with a score of 12. So neither of these watches managed to beat out the Orient. However, if you look a little bit deeper, I think you see something kind of interesting. The score that we're looking at here is an average of the brightness of the hands and the markers, and the Orient has a pretty good balance here. However, if you look at these two watches, and particularly the SWC, the markers are much brighter than the hands. In fact, both of these have brighter markers than the Orient does. So if we were only measuring markers, both of these would take the lead here. And the SWC in particular comes out with a really impressive score of 15 on the dial, which is where they really focused on piling that lume on. The SWC also looks incredibly bright because there is so much lume on there. The lume plots are very large, which makes them more easily visible. So while we're focusing on brightness primarily in this test, you can also take into consideration longevity and the overall area of the lumed area of the watch, both of which are going to factor into your performance after dark. But in this test, that average brightness over 1 hour is what we're using as our benchmark, and the Orient continues to keep the lead there. So we're going to move on to our final two watches. That's going to be the Axios Ironclad versus the Zelos Horizons 43. And this is a matchup I've been really excited about because the Axios Ironclad is the top lume champion that I have. I have never found a watch to top it. However, when I tested the Zelos Horizons 43, it way outperformed my expectations. In fact, I didn't think it was going to even come close to challenging the Axios, so I didn't even include the Axios in the lume test for that review. So this is going to be my first time putting these two head to head, so it'll be really interesting to see which one comes out on top. I think it was kind of cool that we started off with Orient and Seiko, two really established sister companies, and now we've got these kind of micro brand sister companies duking it out at the top of the list. Again, the current score to beat is 14 from the Orient Diver. Let's see if these guys can top it. You can see how insanely bright both of these are, and they are incredibly close. The Zelos Horizons looks like it has just a hair brighter lume than it. It comes in with a score of 18 compared to the Axios' 17. Now, both of those, again, are incredibly bright. I mean, they're just really blowing away the competition at this point. The Zelos scores a massive 4 points higher than the Orient. The Axios is 3 points up, and that means that the Zelos is 80% brighter than the Seiko Samurai. Both of these watches are, of course, using Swiss Superluminova C3X1. I'm not sure how they've applied it, but they managed to do just an incredible job at getting them very bright. And that means that we do have a new lume champion. The Zelos Horizon slightly edges out the Axios in this test. Now, this test is not 100% scientifically rigorous. I could run it a couple of different times and get slightly different results. So, you know, at this level, they're pretty darn close, but I want to call a winner for this. So, yeah, I'm going to have to give it to the Zelos. All right, let's wrap this up and take a look at all the watches as a whole and see how they stack up against one another, kind of get some rankings here. Zelos comes in at first place, followed very closely by the Axios, and then a significant distance behind we get the rest of them. The Orient comes in with third place, and then SWC and Boldr both tied at fourth, and the Seiko rounds out the list at sixth place today. Every single one of these watches has outstanding lume. Again, the Seiko's kind of the baseline here, but it is the lowest one, kind of by far. The other 5 watches on here are all absolutely outstanding. The other thing I want to take a look at is let's go ahead and break down the hand brightness and the marker brightness and kind of see those individual scores as well and see if that would shift up the rankings a little bit. If we look specifically at the markers at each of these watches, we can see some interesting things. For one, the horizons is again just absolutely insane. You can see that they really focused on their marker brightness, and that's really what pulled it ahead of the Axios. I mean, a score of 21 means that the markers here are twice as bright, more than twice as bright as the Seiko Samurai. You can see that SWC also kind of has that strategy of putting on extremely bright markers. That moves them up into third place now if you're focusing just on the markers, with a really impressive score of 15 there. If we move over and take a look at the hands, we can see something a little bit different. Focusing on hands, you see that the Ironclad takes the lead, so it had a very balanced lume profile between the hands and the markers. Ironclad had a 17 on the hands, a 16 on the markers, so very balanced there, which is usually pretty good. The Horizons and the SWC and the Boldr, again, they really focused heavily on the markers, and the hands kind of faded a bit, particularly in the SWC and the Boldr. They scored basically even with the Samurai on their hand sets. The Horizons still had an impressive hand score, but it wasn't nearly as impressive as its marker score. And Orient also was very balanced, so they had a score of 14 on the hands compared to their 13 on the markers. So it's generally a better thing to have a balanced lume profile like that, to have a good balance between the markers and the hands. If the markers are incredibly bright but the hands disappear, you can't read the watch anyways. However, that's not really going to be a problem on any of these watches. Even though the hands do lag behind on some of these, they're still incredibly bright. They're still going to be easily visible after a couple of hours in the dark, but still interesting to see kind of the different strategies that these brands took when it came to luming their watches. Now, one exciting thing about this score system is that it's going to allow me from here on out to be able to give an actual score to every watch that comes in that you'll be able to compare across my reviews. So that's going to become part of the regular specifications part of my videos. You'll be able to see the lume score of a given watch, and you'll be able to compare it by going and watching other of my videos to see what that one scored. I'm going to call this the J score for just the watch, and unfortunately, you can't go back to videos before this one to look at the scores there because those are all over the place. Again, I've been working the numbers on the system for a while and I finally settled on this. So from this video onward, you'll be able to make those comparisons. Now, if you enjoyed this video, definitely ask you to subscribe because I am going to be using this system to do some other interesting lume tests. I want to see how bright tritium is and how a tritium watch would compare in a test like this. I think I can tweak this system to get to work with electroluminescent lume like Indiglo and Casio's Illuminator system. And I thought that would be kind of fun to compare as well. So if that interests you, hit the subscribe button so you can see those videos if and when they come out. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time. Bye.